Hey, what is up everyone? Welcome back to another video. So in this video we'll be discussing what are lists in Python. So lists are ordered sequence that can hold a variety of different types of objects, and they uses square brackets at the start and end, and uses the commas to separate the object in the list. We can take an example of a list as shown on the screen, as starting with the square brackets 1 2 3 4, separating them with commas. Each one is the separate element having a different object type in the list. So as of the strings, the lists also support indexing and slicing the way we have seen them in our previous videos. And the only difference between the string and the list is that the lists are mutatable. Also, the list can be nested and also have a variety of useful methods that can be called off of them. So let's explore all of these concepts in a Jupyter notebook. So in order to create a list, we will give it a name as my list, and then for creating a list, I will start the list with a square bracket and add some element and separate each object with a comma. Once I press Shift and Enter, you would see that a list has been created. So if I'm willing to print the list out, I will just write my list, Shift and Enter. You would see that it will print out the list to me. So in the string, we were just allowed to have just the string, but list is a little bit different. You can also store different data types in one list. So suppose I have the same my list, but I want to make it equal to the first element of the list should be a string, and the second should be an integer, and the third should be a float. And if I press Shift and Enter, you would see that it's a valid string. If I'm willing to print it out the same way, I will print that out by writing my list and pressing Shift and Enter. So it will the Jupyter notebook will show me the contents of my list. If I'm willing to find out the length of this list, so I'll just write len the way we were doing with the strings, with the len and passing the string, passing the my list. You will see that it will find out the length of the string. If I'm willing to get the first element of the list, I will just write my list and add square brackets, and as you know, the indexes of a list also starts with the 0. So if I'm willing to get this element, I will just pass in the key as 0. Once I press Shift and Enter, you will see that it will echo out the first element of the list. If I'm willing to grab the second element, I will just write my list, and inside the square brackets I will pass in 1. Same is the case with the third element. So for third element we will pass 2. The list is the same to the string. Like in the string, we have already understood that if we are willing to get something, we can get that with the indexes. Also, the reverse index also work in this. So suppose if I'm willing to get the last item of the list, I will just pass in -1, and it will get the last item in the list. If we are willing to grab the second last one, so I will just pass -2, and it will grab the second last element in the list. So this was the example of indexing. This was the example of reverse indexing. Now let's look at how the slicing works in the list. If I'm willing to grab these two elements and ignore the first element, so I can use the technique of slicing, which is you can just write my list, and to your list you can just say that start with the first element and go till the end. So what it will do, it will ignore this first element and just grab these two elements and show it to you. If you're willing to say I want to start with the 0 element and I want to ignore this third element, I just want to grab the first element. So what you will do, you will write my list 0:1. What it will do, it will just grab the first element. So I just forgot, we do have to provide the 2, because it will go till the 2, but it will ignore this element. And so we already explained this in our string video, that it will start with 0 and it will go to this first element, and it will also go to the second element, but it will ignore this second element. It will not grab that. So now if I come over and press Shift and Enter, you would see that it will grab these 2 elements and ignore the third one. So this was slicing. Once more, we have indexing, reverse indexing, and slicing right over here. Now let's also look at how to concatenate 2 lists, or how, in simpler words, how to add 2 lists. We can do that in Python. We cannot do that in some of the different languages like C++ or C#. I don't know, in PHP we cannot do that. But in Python it's possible to add 2 lists. So if I come right over here and redefine the content of my list, let's just, for the sake of simplicity, let's just make it equal to 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And if I press Shift and Enter, once I print it out, you can see that it prints out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's also create another list, and let's name it another list and make it equal to 6 and 7. Now, in order to add these 2 lists, my list and another list, what you can just do is write my list and just add a plus sign and then write another list. And press Shift and Enter and you will see an error. It's because instead of declaring it a list, I have declared it as a dictionary. And this is a little difference between the dictionary and a list, that they are the same thing, but you just have to distinct them with the flower brackets and the square brackets. So if I change the square brackets and if I change the flower brackets with the square brackets, press Shift and Enter, and then come over to the statement and press Shift and Enter, you will see that it just adds both of the list and show us the result. So what we have achieved from these 2 lists, and here you can see that the result was different because we were declaring it as a dictionary. So now if I press Shift and Enter, you would see that on this statement, you would see that it comes up okay in order the way we provided it. So now for adding both of the 2, you can see that we just wrote down plus sign in between both of them, and it just showed us the combination of both of the lists. One thing else about the addition, like it's not in place, like the addition of the list is not in place. So suppose I come over here and write my list. My list is the same thing as it was before. The addition didn't change my list or another list. So if I come over here and echo out the another list, both of the lists are still the same, but what it was doing, it was just showing us the added form of both of the lists. If you're willing to store the result of this my list and another list, what you will do, you will create the sum list or something like that. You will store the result in some variable, and once you store it down and you come over here and then press Shift and Enter, you will see that the sum of the list would be stored in the sum list. So, and this was just about the concatenation of 2 lists or addition of 2 lists. So up till now, these all things we have discussed were similar to the strings in the list. Now let's discuss the mutatable and unmutatable. In the strings, we discussed that strings are unmutatable or unmutable. That was because we weren't able to change something. Like suppose we were having a string, so we were not able to do something like this, assigning its 0 key some value. But in list you can do that. If you come over to my list and just press Shift and Enter, you would see that you will see its content. So in my case, it does have the first element as 1. If I'm willing to change that, I will just come over here and I will write something like this. That's my list at 0 element, change something. Suppose I want to add 1 in all caps and press shift and enter. And now if I echo out my list, now you will see that the first element of the list has been changed the way we wanted it. So this is a little different from the strings. In the strings, we were unable to change the first element, but in the list we can do that. In the string, it was unable to. The Python was unable to do that, but in list it can do. Anyway, moving forward and looking at some different functions we can apply on this list. So suppose I have this my list and its content are 1 in all caps and 2 and 3 and 4. If we are willing to append something, I will just write the name of the list and then press dot and press tab. You would see that we can apply different functions on the list. So the first function is append. If I'm willing to append something to a list, I will just write the name of the list and then write append, and I can append something to it. Suppose I'm willing to append 6 to it. So what I will do, I will write my list, append, and add the element that I want to append to the list. Now if I check my list, you would see that the 6 has been added. And you can also note that the append is an in-place function. Once we make change, it's permanent change, like that gets stored in the list. So you can see that the 6 has been stored. Now let's also add one more, and for appending something, you can see that I have wrote down the name of the list, then append. And if I'm willing to add 7, I will just do that. And if I print out the list, you would see that the 7 has been added to the list. Now after append, let's look at another function, and that is, let's look at the pop function. So if you're willing to remove something from a list, you can write pop in front of the list and it will remove something from the list. And what would be that something? That would depend on what you provide as a parameter right over here. So if you don't provide anything to the list, you can see that it removes something from the last, like it removes the last element if you don't provide any parameters to the pop function. But if you provide some parameters to this list, now if I come over here and just press shift and enter, you will see that 7 has been removed. If I do the same thing once more, you would see that now 6 has been removed. If I come over here and write my list and press shift and enter, you would see that 6 has been removed. But if you provide some parameter right over here, suppose I want to remove this element, the first element. So what I will do, I will just pass in the 0th element and press shift and enter, you will see that it will remove the first element. If I'm willing to remove this one, so I will provide the index of this element, and the pop function will remove that element. So once more, if you don't provide anything as a parameter, it will remove the last element. If you provide a parameter as a key, it will remove that element which you have for which you have provided the key of. So this was pop function. We have seen the append function as well as the pop function. Append is used to add something to the list, and pop is used to remove something from the list. One thing you should notice that once we pop something out, it just returns that to this. It just returns that thing to you. Like the pop just returns that thing to you, and it also removes it from the list. So if you're willing to grab that thing, so what you will do, you will store it in some variable. Suppose in my case it would be var my list.pop. So what it will do, now we have the list as 2, 3, and 2, 3, 4, and 5. So what it will do, it will remove the 2 from the list and it will store it in the where. So if I press Shift and Enter, you have seen that it didn't show us anything on the screen. It was because we are not echoing out that thing to the screen. We are just storing it in the where variable. So if I come over here and echo out the where, you will see that it will store the 2. And if I come over here and echo out the list, you would see that the 2 has been removed. So there would be some places where you will need to remove something from the list, but as well as you will store it in a variable. So that's the way to do it. But just understand, it removes the element of which you have provided the key, or in case of not providing the key, it will remove the last element, as well as it will return it back. So you can store it in a variable, or you can just echo it out to the screen. So that was the pop function. We can also look at some more function that would be, let's just explore it by right over here. So remove, you can also use remove, reverse. You can look these out on the internet. Just Google them and you will find just simple explanation. We will also look at them in our course later on, but right now if you are just curious about this function, you can just look them up. But in order to wrap the video up, we'll just discuss one more thing, and that is the sort function. So suppose, for the sake of simplicity, let's change the contents of this list. Let's make it equal to like A, E, X, B, some unsorted elements like that, and C. And let's also create another list in which we will store some numbers. So let's create num list is equal to 4, 1, 8, 3, something silly like that. So once I create these two lists, now the contents of these lists are unsorted. So suppose if I'm willing to arrange these elements in ascending order, what I will do, I will come over here, write the my list, and write sort in front of that, and add brackets. So what this sort will do, it will sort out the contents of this list. If I come over here and echo out the contents, you can see that before sorting, the elements were not in sequence. Now once I applied the sort function on my list, so it just sorted all of the elements in ascending order. It will do the same thing with the numbers as well. So let's check it out. And just in case you just forget about adding these round brackets in front of any function, so what the Jupyter notebook will do, it will show you the information about that function. But if you add these round brackets in front of it, so it will just perform that operation. So now if we check the contents of num list after sorting, you can see that it sorted these numbers out. So it just sorted these numbers out. So this is pretty much it for this video. Just to recap, in this video we discussed what are lists and how to work with them. In the first example, we just looked at how you can declare lists. You can declare lists by square brackets, and you can separate the objects of the list by a comma. We have also seen that you can store different data types in one list. It doesn't really matter if you store strings, integer, and floats all together. If you're willing to check out the length of a string, you can just do that by the length function. And if you're willing to get something from a list, you can get that with the indexes. And you can also use the reverse indexing with list as well as the slicing. And you can also concatenate two strings by adding a plus sign in between them. You can also change, and also we have learned that the lists are mutable. we can just mutate them with the indexes. We can reassign some value to one index, we can remove one index, and we can do all of these crazy stuff. We can also append something to the strings, and we can also pop something from the string, and we can also sort it out. So you can look the different function of the list by googling it and just looking at everything. Also, you can comment down below if you don't understand something. So I'm always active. I'm always answering some questions on my Facebook as well as on this YouTube channel. So if you have anything in your mind, or if you want to learn something about something, you can just hit me up with a comment. So have a pleasant day, and bye for now. I will see you in the next video. Till next time, enjoy hacking or programming, whatever you are doing. Stay cheeky breaky. Peace out.